The Last Stand of the Samurai, Kumamoto, 1877. Dawn breaks over the mist-shrouded hills of Kumamoto, Japan. The year is 1877, and the world is about to witness one of history's most remarkable last stands. As the morning sun pierces through the fog, 37 men prepare for what they know will be their final battle. These aren't just any warriors. They are the last true samurai, about to make their desperate stand against an overwhelming force of 3,000 government troops armed with modern rifles and artillery. Picture the American West during its final days, when gunslingers and outlaws faced the unstoppable tide of civilization. Now imagine that same struggle taking place in Japan, but instead of cowboys, we have samurai. Warriors bound by a code of honor centuries old, watching their entire way of life vanish before their eyes. This is the story of Japan's own Alamo, a tale of defiance that would shake the very foundations of a nation racing toward modernization. The story begins in the aftermath of the Satsuma Rebellion, led by the legendary Saigo Takamori, often called the Last Samurai. But our tale isn't about Saigo. It's about something even more extraordinary. A band of his most devoted followers who refused to accept that the age of the samurai was over. These 37 warriors had served under Saigo, watching as their beloved leader fell in battle against the government's modern army. But while most surrendered or fled, these men made a different choice. In their hearts burned a fire that wouldn't be extinguished. A desperate need to prove that the samurai spirit couldn't be killed by mere bullets and cannons. Let's paint a picture of what Japan looked like in 1877. The country was transforming at a dizzying pace. Steam engines whistled through landscapes where horses had trotted for centuries. Telegraph wires stretched across cities where once smoke signals had been the fastest form of communication. The Emperor Meiji's government was pushing Japan into the modern age with almost frightening speed. But for the samurai class, this brave new world meant the end of everything. Imagine being told that your entire way of life, your profession, your beliefs, your very identity, was now obsolete. The government had stripped them of their traditional privileges, banned the wearing of swords in public, and even cut off their distinctive top knots, a symbol of samurai status for generations. For our 37 warriors, this wasn't just about losing status or privilege. It was about watching the soul of Japan being sold for Western machines and ideas. They had witnessed their fellow samurai reduced to poverty, forced to take menial jobs or become merchants, occupations they had once considered beneath their dignity. The leader of these 37 was Nakamura Hanjiro, a man who had served as a captain in Saigo's army. Picture a warrior in his mid-40s with eyes that had seen too much change and a heart that couldn't accept it. He gathered his men in secret in an old temple in the mountains of Kumamoto Prefecture. There, surrounded by autumn maples and the echoes of ancient prayers, they made their fateful decision. Their plan was audacious, perhaps even insane. They would strike at the very symbol of the new Japan, the local government offices in Kumamoto. But this wasn't just a random attack. They chose their target carefully, aiming to make a statement that would resonate throughout the nation. The samurai spirit was not dead. What made their decision even more remarkable was that they knew, with absolute certainty, that they could not win. The government army had repeating rifles, Armstrong cannons, and trained soldiers. The 37 had their swords, a few outdated firearms, and their unwavering conviction. It was like bringing a sword to a gunfight, literally. Yet they persisted. On the night before their attack, they gathered for a final meal together. Imagine the scene. 37 warriors, some young, some old, sharing sake and speaking of honor, duty, and the world they were about to leave behind. They wrote their final letters home, composed death poems as samurai had done for centuries, and prepared their souls for what was to come. The timing of their rebellion was symbolic. They chose November 23, 1877, the day of the annual Harvest Festival. As the city celebrated and officials relaxed their guard, the 37 would strike. Their message was clear. While Japan rushed headlong into the future, they would remind everyone of the values being left behind. As the festival lanterns swayed in the autumn breeze, the 37 warriors moved through the shadows of Kumamoto's streets. Their footsteps were silent, their hearts thundering with anticipation. Each man carried a sword at his hip, no longer a symbol of status, but now a weapon of rebellion. Some clutched older firearms, relics of a rapidly fading era. They had chosen to die as warriors rather than live as remnants of a forgotten age. The first sign that something was wrong came when the night watchman at the government office noticed unusual movements in the darkness. Before he could raise the alarm, the samurai were already through the outer gates. Their attack was precise, calculated, and devastating. The few guards on duty, expecting nothing more threatening than drunk festival-goers, were quickly overwhelmed. Within minutes, flames began to rise from the government buildings. The samurai had struck their first blow against the new order, but this was more than simple destruction. Each building they targeted represented something they had lost. The tax office that had stripped samurai of their stipends, the military bureau that had replaced sword with rifle, the education office that taught Western ideas over traditional values. But the 37 weren't just destroying, they were making a statement. They distributed proclamations throughout the city, explaining their actions. These weren't the rambling manifestos of madmen, but carefully written declarations of purpose. They spoke of honor, of duty, of the soul of Japan that they believed was being sacrificed on the altar of progress. One passage from their proclamation still resonates today. We do not fight for glory or for power. We fight to remind Japan that there are some things worth more than progress, some traditions that should not be discarded like worn-out sandals. A nation that forgets its soul may gain the world, but will lose itself. The response from the government was swift and overwhelming. As dawn broke over the burning buildings, military units began to mobilize. The sound of bugles echoed through the streets as soldiers with modern rifles took up positions. Artillery pieces were wheeled into place, their steel barrels gleaming in the morning light. The 37 had anticipated this. They had chosen their next position carefully, an old Buddhist temple complex on a hill overlooking the city. The stone walls and elevated position would give them what little advantage they could hope for against modern weapons. As they took their positions, they could see the government forces gathering below, their numbers growing by the hour. What followed was a scene that could have come from a classic samurai tale, but with a tragic modern twist. The government commander, perhaps out of respect for tradition or a desire to avoid bloodshed, sent a messenger offering terms of surrender. Nakamura Hanjiro's response was pure samurai. We did not embrace this path expecting to survive. We chose it knowing we would die. Your mercy, while honorable, cannot be accepted. The first assault came at mid-morning. Government troops advanced in modern military formation, their rifles at the ready. The samurai met them with a combination of old and new. Precise rifle shots from their outdated weapons, followed by fierce sword charges that shocked the modern soldiers with their ferocity. The government forces fell back, leaving their dead and wounded, stunned by the intensity of the resistance. But modern warfare is unforgiving to ancient courage. The next attack came with artillery. The temple walls, built to withstand arrows and swords, began to crumble under the impact of explosive shells. Still, the samurai fought on. When their ammunition ran out, they relied solely on their swords. When government troops breached one section of wall, they would find the defenders waiting with drawn blades, choosing to die fighting rather than retreat. As the day wore on, the scene became increasingly surreal. Modern soldiers with rifles faced men wielding swords and fighting techniques passed down through centuries. The sound of gunfire mixed with battle cries that hadn't changed since the age of Nobunaga. Some of the government troops later reported that it felt like fighting ghosts, warriors from Japan's past who had somehow stepped into the present for one final battle. The 37 fought with a skill that seemed to transcend their outdated weapons. One government officer wrote in his report, "They moved like demons, appearing where our fire was weakest, striking with impossible speed. It was as if centuries of samurai warfare had been distilled into these few men. Had they possessed our weapons? I doubt we could have stood against them." By late afternoon, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The temple complex lay in ruins, its ancient walls shattered by artillery fire. Of the 37 samurai who had begun the day, fewer than half remained. Yet those who survived fought on, their resistance becoming more desperate with each passing hour. They knew they were fighting not just for their lives, but for their place in history. As the sun began to set, Nakamura Hanjiro gathered his remaining warriors in the temple's inner sanctuary. The space was thick with smoke from the burning buildings, but through the haze, these last samurai could see in each other's eyes the same unwavering resolve that had brought them here. According to accounts from government soldiers who overheard it, Nakamura's final speech to his men was brief but powerful. "My brothers, you have fought with honor that would make our ancestors proud. What happens next will be remembered not as our defeat, but as proof that the spirit of Bushido cannot be destroyed by mere steel and gunpowder. Let them write in their history books that when Japan rushed to embrace the new, there were still some who remembered the old ways. Let them remember that we died as samurai." What followed was a scene that would be immortalized in countless stories and local legends. The remaining samurai emerged from the burning temple, swords drawn, into the dying light of day. They didn't charge blindly, but walked with deliberate steps, their bearing proud and dignified. The government troops, expecting a final desperate attack, were momentarily stunned by this display of composure in the face of certain death. One government officer, moved by the sight, ordered his men to present arms in a show of respect. For a brief moment, the modern era saluted the past it was replacing. Then the silence was broken by gunfire, and the last chapter of the 37 began. Not a single samurai surrendered. Those who could still stand fought until they fell, their swords flashing in the light of the burning temple. Nakamura himself was the last to fall, reportedly cutting down 3 more soldiers with his dying strength. By nightfall, it was over. The 37 had passed into history. But their story didn't end there. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The people of Kumamoto, rather than condemning the rebels as troublemakers, began leaving offerings at the temple ruins. Small shrines appeared, marking where different warriors had fallen. Even some of the government soldiers who had fought against them wrote accounts praising their courage and dedication. The government, worried about creating martyrs, tried to downplay the incident. But the story spread throughout Japan, passed along in whispered conversations and private letters. It became a symbol of something more than just resistance to change. It represented the struggle to maintain one's principles in a changing world. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this rebellion's legacy is how it's viewed today. In modern Japan, the 37 are not remembered as enemies of progress, but as men who reminded their nation that modernization didn't have to mean abandoning everything from the past. Their story is taught not as a warning against resistance to change, but as an example of the importance of holding on to one's principles, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The site of their last stand has become a small memorial park. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, people gather to pay respects not just to the warriors who fell there, but to the ideals they represented. Among the visitors are often young professionals from Japan's high-tech firms, seeking inspiration from these men who dared to question whether all change is progress. What makes this story particularly relevant today is how it speaks to our own struggles with rapid change. In our world of constant technological advancement and cultural shifts, the 37 remind us that it's possible to face change without losing our core values. Their rebellion wasn't really against progress itself, but against the idea that progress requires us to abandon everything that came before. The 37 samurai lost their battle against modernization, but in doing so, they won something perhaps more important. They proved that courage, honor, and conviction transcend time. They showed that even in defeat, it's possible to inspire future generations. As we close this chapter of Japanese history, consider this. In an era where change happens at an ever-increasing pace, perhaps we need stories like this more than ever. The 37 remind us that while progress is inevitable, the values that make us human, courage, loyalty, and the willingness to stand up for what we believe in, remain timeless. Their story lives on not just in history books or memorial stones, but in the hearts of those who understand that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is standing firm for what you believe in, even when the whole world seems to be moving in a different direction. Thank you for watching this exploration of one of Japan's most remarkable last stands. If you've enjoyed learning about this fascinating piece of history, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories that bridge the gap between Japan's past and present. Don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with anyone who might be interested in discovering these hidden gems of history. Until next time, sayonara.